Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
All right. So before we begin, is there anyone that is here after a long absence or for first time? In that case, we will follow a tradition of going around in the room and introduce ourselves. So my name is Juan.
Kevin.
My name is Ray.
My name is Matthew.
I'm Grant.
Evan.
My name is Jerry. My name is Henry.
My name is Grisha.
Jay.
My name is Cass.
I'm Richard. Jack. I'm Brad.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Dale here with us. Dale Borglum founded and directed the Hanuman Foundation Dying Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the first residential facility in the United States to support conscious dying. Working with Ram Dass and Stephen Levine, Dale helped found the conscious dying movement in the West. He has been the executive director of the Living Dying Project in Santa Fe and since 1986 in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's the co-author with Ram Dass, Daniel Goleman and Dwarka Bonner of Journey of Awakening, a meditator's guidebook, Bantam Books, and has taught meditation since 1974. Dale lectures and gives workshops on the topics of meditation, healing, spiritual support for those with life-threatening illness, and a caregiving as a spiritual practice. He has taught with Ram Dass, Stephen Levine, Joan Halifax, Robert Thurman, Joanna Macy, Jack Kornfield, Annie Lamott, J. Uttal, and many others. He has a doctorate degree from Stanford University. Welcome, Dale.
First of all, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person today. I have to have a meeting in a few days with somebody who's very COVID cautious. And it's an important meeting, so I just decided I'd honor her wishes and be very careful for a few days before. It's lovely to see so many old friends and to be back with you guys. I get invited about once a year. It was, I think, last October of 2021. This is, I think, the third time during the pandemic that I've been invited to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship, and it's always a pleasure to come. Today I'd like to talk about vowing to become whole, vowing to heal. And I'd like this talk to be as informal as possible. Feel free at any time to raise your hand or interrupt or just jump in with a comment or a question. I can't see everybody, so I don't know how I'll know that, but just speak out, and I would glad to have other people talk. As well, I put the Living Dying Project website address in the chat function, and we have our own speaker series, and in January, there's a woman named Tenzin Palmo who's going to speak. She's a really remarkable woman who lived in a cave in the Himalayas for 12 years and isn't even speaking in public anymore, but she's agreed to have a conversation with me on Thursday, January 19th. And we have a lot of other free information on our website. There's a Wednesday night group that has a couple of open spaces in it with me, a small group, 9 people. So enough of self-promotion, on to the Dharma. Vowing to surrender. So this is a Buddhist group, and of course there are all kinds of Buddhism. There's Theravada Buddhism, there's Mahayana Buddhism, there's Vajrayana Buddhism, and all of these levels or schools of Buddhism come with vows that people take. I've found in my own practice that taking a vow not to do something has a lot more power than just trying not to do that thing, right? That if you want to become a better practitioner, to meditate more, to be less judgmental, to be more heartfelt, that I think all of us have those impulses, all of us have those desires, but we find that the momentum of our social conditioning from our childhoods is so strong that often these addictive patterns or these really deep-seated patterns overwhelm our best intentions, and that at times taking a vow can be really useful. So in the first level of Buddhist practice, Vipassana practice, Hinayana practice, Theravada, whatever you want to call that, what we're really doing is giving up the wish for things to be better. We're embracing hopelessness. Now that sounds kind of depressing, but we're not hoping, we're not giving up hope that things aren't going to become better, but we're giving up hope that things are different than the way they are right now. Right now, things are exactly the way they are. And in some schools of Buddhism, they even talk about that we need hopelessness before we can find fearlessness. That giving up hope, being willing to surrender into this moment, is the very first step on the path. So that I have found taking vows at times to be less judgmental, or even in terms of interpersonal relationships, where it becomes more of an emotional kind of a vow, taking a vow to stay with another person, not to run away. And the reason that it's difficult to stay present, the reason it's difficult to stay with the breath or to stay with sensation, is that being with the present means accepting the groundless nature of reality. It means not trying to hope that things are going to be different. That right now, in fact, things are always changing moment to moment to moment. And being willing to accept things just as the way they are is very, very challenging, because we're trying to solidify our place in life. We're trying to solidify our stance that here's me, here's Dale, here's what I know. I can judge you because I think I know what's right, and I'm not so sure that you do. So that can we take this vow to be in our bodies, to be centered, to be grounded, to let go of this or that? I remember a long time ago, I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'd come back from India. I have this PhD in science. And I had just gotten over malaria and hepatitis at the same time. I had almost died. And I really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was living in Cambridge with some friends, and I decided to take a vow that I was going to meditate 2 hours every day. I had a full-time job. I had a lot of friends around. I remember one day we had worked really hard all day, and then there was a party that night, and I hadn't gotten around to meditating. It was about 11 at night. And I still sat there for 2 hours, almost falling asleep, but I completed the vow. I kept doing what I said I was going to do. And what came out of that was my life really profoundly changed. Every time that I've committed myself to awakening in some very direct way, something has, in a very obvious way, moved or opened up. So that this first vow, in a sense, is beginning to look at what you tend to run to when there's that queasiness of surrendering into the moment. Do you go to the computer? Do you go to a glass of wine? Do you go to the television set? Do you go to staying too busy all the time? And take a vow to refrain from running to a certain place. I find that even that's a stronger practice than saying, well, I'm going to meditate a bunch, but just watching the way that I tend to run away, particularly in the mirror of relationships. People I'm close to, can I let go of holding on to that sense of there's a safe space, and I feel a little bit emotionally disconnected. In a way, all of us have some background sense of anxiety that keeps us distracted. When we sit down to meditate, we see how difficult it is to let the mind just settle. And that sense of anxiety, that sense of aggression is really trying to hold on to this sense of I'm a separate self, which upon further examination doesn't really exist. So from the standpoint of the body, it's about getting grounded and centered. Can we begin to inhabit the hara, the lower belly? That's really a lot of what Zen is about, of surrendering into the belly, of letting us drop out of the mind down into the lower part of the body. I'd like to read a very short part of a poem by Rumi. And in this poem, there's a guy who's complaining to God that he's been praying and God never responds to his prayer. He never hears an answer. And God, through Rumi's voice, says, "The longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup." So what Rumi is saying in this very poetic way here is he's talking about hopelessness. He says, the longing you express is the return message. Can we feel that even in our longing, even though we're not hearing some answer, that God isn't tapping us on the shoulder? And I know talking about God in front of a bunch of Buddhists is not necessarily the best thing to do all the time, but we can translate Rumi's words into a more less theistic way of thinking about things, that the longing we're feeling is the answer, that we can surrender even into the longing, that we're not waiting, we're not hoping that something is going to be changing. So it's learning to make a relationship with what we're trying to get away from, rather than pushing it away, leaning into the suffering, leaning into the place that we're trying to run away from. I mean, it's almost the fundamental paradox of spiritual practice, that we're practicing because we want to suffer less, and we're using our practice as a tool to get rid of suffering. But the way practice truly works is to feel the suffering, to lean into it, to be with it, to let the suffering soften us, and to be something that opens our hearts rather than something that tightens into aversion and pushing away. Can we begin to use suffering as grace? Ram Dass had this great line, suffering is grace. And it's really only grace when you really truly want to be free. If all you're doing is wanting to not suffer so much, then suffering is not grace. But if you're really saying, I want to be free of all this, I want to be truly open, I want to inhabit my true nature moment to moment to moment, then where we're suffering, where we're running away, where we're pushing away, where we're hoping that this moment will be different than it is showing us exactly what we need to surrender into. So the first step in this healing practice, the Theravada stage, the Vipassana stage, is becoming more aware of what it is we're running away from. And it's very easy in mindfulness practice to get fixated on the surface of experience. There's a breath, there's an in-breath, there's an out-breath, there's a distracting thought, there's a sensation in my lower back, there's an in-breath, there's another thought, there's a sound from outside of the room. And we're staying with these moment-to-moment changes rather than being with, at times, the underlying sense of anxiety or tension or grief or low-level this emotion or that emotion, that all these surface things are being filtered through, and that we're
Excuse me, I have a question.
Okay.
The whole time you've been talking, I'm listening and trying to concentrate, but it's right from the beginning what you said about taking a vow. If we're surrendering to hopelessness and things are the way they are in the moment, it seems like taking a vow to get something else or be something else is contradictory. So I'm not quite understanding that.
Who is speaking there? I can't see anybody lighting up.
Greg, I'm in the big group.
Okay. Oh, got it. Okay. So there are a lot of paradoxes in spiritual practice. And I hear what you're saying, that it seems like a paradox. I mean, basically, the nature of reality is non-dual, and yet we're doing dualistic practice. And what I'm saying here about taking a vow is, I mean, in Theravada practice, often the first thing we do, particularly during a longer practice period, is taking refuge. You take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. You're trusting that I don't have to try to change things or fix things, that all I really need to do is pay attention, and this basic goodness, this basic awareness will begin to awaken in a very natural way. So that we're taking this dualistic vow, saying, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. I do that for the second time, I do that for the third time. And we're doing this really dualistic thing to create a foundation so that we can have the courage to surrender into being in the present. It's developmental stages that we're doing this dualistic thing of I'm doing something so I can begin to understand, I can begin to really get in a very deep way that the I who's taking refuge doesn't even fundamentally exist. But we have to start out where we are. And the talk I'm going to be giving, I guess, is going to be going through the other developmental stages of Buddhism, Mahayana and Vajrayana, where eventually this relationship with the I, with the ego fixation, is going to be changing. It's going to be becoming a lot more subtle. So in this notion of being persistent in practice and going through the fear of letting go, this sense of not being a solid practitioner, if you will, what we find underneath it all is this basic human goodness. And that at the same time, fear will arise, often in a very subtle form. I was at a longer retreat once, and toward the end of the retreat, my mind was getting very still, and I felt very open, and it felt wonderful. It's blissful, actually. And yet, distracting thoughts kept arising. And I asked myself, why is it that I don't just rest in this wide open place? Because it feels so expansive and so wonderful. And I noticed there is this cycle of openness, quiet mind, and then there's distracting thought, and then there's awareness of distracting thought, and then back to the openness. But when I really paid attention, right before I would think, there was some fear of the spaciousness that had gotten too big. The I was getting too lonely, right? So that we're going back and forth between this dualistic practice of I need to reify myself. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And the ego believes that. And surrendering into something much, much deeper than that. And it's back and forth. It's just a gradual process of creating new neural pathways in which we begin to trust this sense of surrender. Fundamentally, we're taking this vow to surrender into the present moment, So
when we take the vow and we realize we're not doing what we vow. It's just to accept that and say, oh, I'm not doing that, but not judge it, not be hard on ourselves. And eventually we might start doing what we vow.
Yeah. I mean, soon we're going to get to the Bodhisattva vow, the Mahayana part of Buddhism. And the first part of the Bodhisattva vow is sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Right? You're saying you're going to save all beings. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Well, probably you and I aren't going to save all sentient beings or put an end to all desire today. And maybe it won't even happen tomorrow. Okay. But in taking that vow, you begin to notice how you're not fulfilling it. So for instance, I have these small groups that I facilitate, and a year ago we decided, why don't we all take a vow? And I took the vow not to judge other people or myself in thought, speech, or deed, as did a few other people. One guy took a vow not to look at pornography. And even though there's a lot of momentum behind me in still judging people once in a while, the fact that I had taken the vow enabled me to notice when I was judging much more frequently than it would have if I hadn't taken the vow. So it wasn't like, okay, I'm judging somebody, I'm breaking the vow, I'm a really bad person, I'm a bad practitioner, but that I was more likely to notice it. There was some focus, some strength behind the vow I had taken. I will say that the guy who vowed not to watch pornography only lasted 2 days. But even still, he had taken that vow and he was working with that place in himself that needed to distract, that needed to have a certain kind of mental excitement. So that the vow isn't there to create guilt or shame, but to create a structure that allows deeper surrender. Very often during retreats, people take vows not to lie, not to kill, not to steal, not to take intoxicants, and not to have, what do they call it, inappropriate sexual behavior or something like that. And I remember being at a long Vipassana retreat, and I was running out of toothpaste, and I was thinking of taking sharing a bathroom with a bunch of other guys to steal somebody's toothpaste, like take one squeeze of somebody's toothpaste. And I said, no, I've taken this vow not to steal. And I mean, even though that was a silly thing, it was really bringing me back to who I am, and am I really practicing from a sense of poverty or a sense of abundance? And as we go through these stages, first the Hinayana, when we get to Vajrayana, it's more a practicing from a sense of richness and abundance. That as we go through the yanas, I hope most of you know what the yanas are. In Hinayana, we're giving up wishing that things are better, because they are just the way they are, and all we have to do is be mindful. There's this underlying, profoundly positive belief that bears out in practice that we don't have to fix things, that all we have to do is be aware of them, be mindful, be really present, and that gradually we will find this underlying goodness, that we can begin to let go of practicing from a sense of poverty, I need to fix myself. And then when we get to Mahayana, we're giving up practicing only for yourself. We're practicing for all beings. We're practicing so that others can be free, so that your partner, your parents, your children, your community, whoever it is, that they can be free, that Donald Trump can be free, that Vladimir Putin can be free. And in Vajrayana, we give up our identity. We give up this sense of solidness. But we've got to start where we are. And for most of us, it's the Hinayana vow of giving up wishing things to be better, embracing hopelessness. That is dying into the moment. And once again, that Rumi line where he says, the longing you express is the return message. So that we're making a relationship with even the longing itself. And particularly in relationships. I happen to be in a relationship and living with somebody for the first time in 40 years. And I'm really watching in my own life the almost unconscious impulse to at times pull back emotionally. I'm not talking about just being busy doing my job and my work and my writing and those things, but to actually pull back, because being open to another human being, there's a sense of vulnerability. Can I begin to make a relationship with that sense of vulnerability, with the basic ambiguity, the edginess of life, because there isn't this solid sense of self. So that as an exercise, I would suggest that you begin to notice where you meet that edge, where you meet that place where you want to run away. And that can really deepen your practice. When you're sitting there quietly, when you're with other people, when you're doing your job, when you're moving around, what is it you tend to run away to? I'm addicted to excitement. I think life is exciting. The world is exciting and all of its complexity. I will, rather than be calm, I will try to find excitement. In fact, one of my teachers said, Westerners tend to mistake excitement for happiness, right? That just by grabbing at excitement all the time, we think that's practice. Okay, so what we're saying now is that when you get centered enough, when we become embodied enough, when we embrace hopelessness enough, then the heart begins to open, the heart of compassion, the Mahayana stage of practice. Mahayana, great vehicle, is a vehicle big enough to get all sentient beings across the ocean of suffering. You're practicing for all beings. And I personally find that when I'm practicing for others, it really strengthens my practice way, way more than if I think I'm just trying to get beyond my own suffering, right? In Buddhism, there's this very important concept called codependent origination, which means that everybody and everything is connected and interdependent with everybody else. Thich Nhat Hanh called it interbeing. And there's the nihilists who say that nothing is real, nothing exists. There's the absolutist that says everything is real. But in Buddhism, what we're saying is there's this quality of emptiness, that everything is real, but it's only relatively real. It's dependent on consciousness. It's dependent on us being there. And that I don't exist without you. And that your suffering is my suffering, and my joy is your joy, and vice versa. So that making this commitment now at the second stage of vow, making a commitment to leap into the world, leap into the pain of the world, that your pain is my pain, the pain of your partner, the pain of your friend, the pain of your enemy is your own pain. The Dalai Lama, in such a beautiful way, talks about my enemy, my friend, the Chinese, who are killing, torturing, and raping his monks and nuns. And he can talk about the Chinese and be joyful at the same time. But there's this beautiful, beautiful notion in Vajrayana Buddhism that compassion is the mixture of sadness and joy. There's a sadness that there's suffering in the world, and there's a joy that your heart is open, a joy that transcends happiness and sadness. Can we be so open? Can we take this vow to, this bodhisattva vow, to practice for others so genuinely, so truthfully, that even though there is so much suffering in the world, there's a pandemic, there's a war, there's global climate change, on and on and on. There's political divisiveness. There's racism. There's sexism. There's anti-gay feeling. There's all these things all over the place. And can we still have a joyful heart while we're opening to the sadness of all of these human tragedies, these places where people are so lost in ignorance and aggression? So, Suzuki Roshi said that spiritual practice is being willing to get on a boat, a ship that's going out into the ocean, knowing that it's going to sink. You're on this boat, you're knowing it's going to sink, and it's going to sink because what's going to die is your attachment to your own self. The Bodhisattva vow is like being on a sinking ship and being willing to be the last person to get off, because you want everybody else to get off. I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with Tonglen practice, where you're taking in the suffering of another human being, taking it into your own body, into your own heart of hearts, and sending out the antidote with loving kindness. You're taking in what's most difficult of someone else's and sending out what's most precious of your own. And in doing this, we're cutting at the very root our self-clinging, our self-cherishing, our hope that we're going to be better. And in that, becoming free. So the Bodhisattva vow, sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to attain it. Now, clearly, those aren't things that are going to happen for most of us in this lifetime, or maybe a lot of lifetimes in the future, to save all sentient beings, to end all desires, to master all the dharmas, to attain the Buddha's way. But in taking the vow, we begin to notice how we're not doing that, how we're not working to save other people, how we're not working with our desires. So you've taken the Bodhisattva vow, you're driving down the street, you see a homeless person. You're walking down the sidewalk, you see a homeless person. Your vow is to save all beings. It doesn't mean you give the person money necessarily, but can at least your heart open as you're walking by that person? Or do we recoil because it's so difficult to see so much suffering again and again and again? There's a notion these days of something called compassion fatigue. And I humbly state that it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as compassion fatigue. There is almost compassion fatigue. There is fake compassion fatigue. But if you're truly feeling compassion, because the heart is fundamentally and absolutely boundless, there is no place for suffering to stick in you. When you're really doing Tonglen, you're not going to pick up any toxicity, because the heart is boundless. So that people burn out, not because they're compassionate, but because they're not being compassionate. Because the compassion is only partial, and that certain kinds of suffering remind you, or of your mother, or of your lover, or whatever it is, that certain kinds of suffering that we come in contact with become overwhelming. And we begin to close our hearts, and it's the closing of the heart that creates the suffering. There was a book written by a female psychotherapist who was saying she had noticed that certain of her clients exhausted her, but some of them didn't at all. And when she was done with certain clients, she felt filled and enriched, and sometimes she felt kind of depleted. And she examined, why did some people deplete her? And she thought, probably it's the people that have the most difficult, intractable problems. But when she looked at it, that wasn't the case. And what she really found was that the people that she couldn't connect with were the ones that exhausted her. And that compassion has certain defining qualities. One of them is being able to connect with somebody's suffering, connect with your own suffering, vowing to connect with suffering. Another defining quality of compassion is spaciousness, realizing the heart is totally boundless and spacious. Spacious is really coming out of this notion of codependent origination, that nothing is solid. It's all connected. And it's only concepts that are solid. And the third quality, defining quality of compassion, is warmth. So you could take any of those three qualities and make it into a practice. Is it a spacious heart? Is it a warm heart? Is it a connected heart right now? Right now, as we're in this partly virtual, partly in-person room, are we connected? And then finally, there's the Vajrayana path, the tantric path. And my personal experience is that for many people in the West, Tantra is a very natural path, that not a lot of us are yogis. Not a lot of us have time to go on a lot of long retreats and really deepen very, very deeply our mindfulness during retreats. The Theravada path is essentially a monastic path. It can be practiced by householders, but the tantric path, where we're beginning to say, now I can practice from a sense of richness, that everything that's arising is completely a manifestation of Buddha nature, that illness and death is just as much Buddha nature as wellness in life, that sadness and happiness, fame, blame, shame, gain, all those different things, all the dualities, are equally manifestation of Buddha nature. So the vow is called the Samaya vow. The tantric vow is to realize the perfect union of wisdom and skillful means. And the wisdom is that we're whole already. We're not practicing to fix something. There's a great Chinese sage who said, what you are looking for is who is looking. Enlightenment is not something we're going to find. It's who we are already. It's surrendering into the hopelessness of this moment fully with an open heart and realizing the richness of each experience. Once again, Hafiz quote, he says, I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in the darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. So that when we finally get to Tantra, we get to the Samaya vow, the Vajrayana vow. It's the vow to realize the wholeness of things as they are already. And then use skillful means to act from that. That when you see that homeless person, when you see Donald Trump doing all the crazy shit that he's doing right now, that even that is an expression of Buddha nature. That it doesn't mean we don't protest. It doesn't mean we don't do what we can do to bring healing to the world and to our own lives and to the lives of those around us. But it's not like we're doing that from a sense of, oh my God, this is horrible out there. But it's our interaction through skillful means with this wisdom of inherent wholeness and inherent goodness, that everything is an expression of Buddha nature. So it's a process of deepening surrender. And so in my life, depending on how caught I am in interpersonal relationship or politics or money or work or whatever it is, sometimes I go back to the very beginning and take refuge in Buddha nature and just work with surrendering into my body and the hopelessness of things being any different and becoming grounded and being centered and being embodied. And that then is the foundation for opening my heart and being a bodhisattva, at least partially, and working to alleviate suffering for other human beings. And then finally into this tantric vow. And to be honest, one of the happiest, most joyful things I ever do is when I practice compassion for other beings. When I go to bed at night and instead of counting sheep, I lie there and I think of all the people in my groups and my family and my friends and people I know about through the news. And I do one breath of Tonglen, or maybe I'll just think of that person and go into wholeness, think of that person, go into wholeness. And it just brings such joy to my heart. A long time ago, back like 40 years ago when there were a lot of yogis and swamis, actually longer than that, back in the 70s when all these lamas and yogis and swamis and roshis were coming to the Bay Area. And I was a real committed seeker, whatever that means. I would go to these saintly people and I'd ask them my test question. And the test question is, what should I say to a friend of mine who's dying, who's never meditated? How could I help that person? And the good ones always said something along the lines of, merge your mind with the one mind, and then merge your mind with the mind of your friend. Don't try to work with a place where they're broken. Don't focus on the dying. Don't focus on the cancer. Don't focus on the brokenness. Don't even focus on the person. Focus on the delusion that they're separate from wholeness in the first place. Just go into wholeness and be with them. And that's the deepest healing. And these vows will bring us to that place eventually. And then we'll forget it, and then we'll come back again and forget and come back again. Will bring us to that place where we can rest in wholeness and be with the suffering of other human beings and keep seeing their wholeness. And that was the blessing I had in being around Ram Dass's guru, my guru, Nim Karoli Baba, and being with the Dalai Lama and Kalu Rinpoche and Anandamayi and all these great beings, is they kept seeing the wholeness in me, that no matter how neurotic I was, sitting right in front of them feeling inadequate, and they kept seeing the wholeness, I finally started believing them. That if they could see how whole I was, that maybe they knew more than I did. But I couldn't quite believe how they could see that the guy next to me was whole because he was such a complete jerk. That took a little longer, that part. Okay. So we've got about a quarter of an hour for discussion and questions and answers. I can talk for longer, but I'd like to leave time here. Taking a vow as a way of strengthening practice, Hinayana vow, Mahayana vow, Vajrayana vow. And you can take a Mahayana vow without being a Zen practitioner. You can take a Tantric vow without being a Tibetan Buddhist. But just see the way the deepening of Dharma practice unfolds in you. One can be a Vipassana meditator and go through all these stages just doing Vipassana. And these stages will unfold naturally. Although when you see what the stages are, you can, in my laziness, want to speed things up, do as little work as I can to get there. I like to see what's coming next so I can enable the next stage to open as easily as possible. So, comments or questions, please.
I have a question about being with people who are suffering or maybe dying.
Yes.
My name is Cass. And I like what you said about merging with the one mind and then merging with the mind of the person you're with. I guess my question is that in those situations, I always feel a need to comfort the person, and I'm curious what your advice or your experience of being with somebody without that need to comfort them in those situations might be like.
Right. So you remember, like a few minutes ago, I was saying that compassion has three defining qualities: spaciousness or emptiness, connectedness, and warmth. And one can give words of comfort to somebody from a place of spaciousness and connectedness and have the words just coming out of you. But at the same time, one can give words of comfort because you're uncomfortable with the spaciousness. And you're saying things to fill up the space, right? So a very subtle practice is begin to ask yourself, am I doing this now? Am I saying this now? Am I thinking this now? Because it's coming out of is coming freely and openly out of my Buddha nature? Or is there a tightness that's motivating me to do something in a way to fill up the space, that I have some hope that I'm going to make this moment different, right? And one can do an exercise. When I teach longer workshops, I have people do an exercise where there's two people in a dyad, and one of them is saying to the other person, here's what's difficult for me. Here's where I'm having a hard time in my life right now. And the other person's job is to be meditating, and they're grounded and centered, and they open their heart of compassion. They're breathing into their heart, feeling a sense of spaciousness. And that's their priority. They can be quiet or they can say something, but they should only be saying something if it's coming out of this inner place of having this embodied mindfulness supporting open-heartedness. Right. And even professional therapists who've been therapists for a long time are shocked by how quickly they jump into therapist mode, where they're saying something to be the fixer, because being with somebody else's suffering can be really uncomfortable. Right. So can you bear being with that other person? And think of the message that you're giving to the other person if their suffering is making you uncomfortable. Right. They're the one that's suffering and you're the one that's getting reactive. I mean, even the extreme case, somebody's dying and you're needing to fill up the space. And they're thinking, my God, I'm the one who's dying, and this person is not able even to be here. Right. So that can we be this living example, this living model of, I'm not necessarily completely free right now, but I'm working with my tendency to get caught in your suffering. And in fact, I teach caregiving, not as helping another person, but caregiving is work on yourself. You're not trying to help anybody. You're trying to wake up. And the more you're waking up in the process, the better caregiver you're going to be. But when you're busy focusing on how can I help, you're missing the signals in you that are making it difficult for you to be a good caregiver. So just imagine that on the side of your head, on the temple here, there's a knob that you can turn that goes from 0 to 100. And at 0, none of your attention's inside of yourself. It's all out in the environment. I mean, like suppose you're at like a 49ers game, or suppose that you're in a big traffic jam or something, and everything's outside there. And or if you push the knob to 100, you turn it to 100, then all the attention's inside of you. You're so deeply aware of what you're doing that you don't hear the phone ring, or you forget that you're even hungry or something like that, right? But you can play with that knob. Is it possible right now to have the knob be at 75-25? The 75% of your attention is you're in your body, you're present, you're aware, you're still hearing. 25% of you is paying attention to me, right? But most of your attention is I'm present, I'm with my breath, or whatever practice you're doing. You're in yourself in a certain way. And you can play with that knob, 75-25, 25-75, 90-10, right? And see how it changes your interaction with yourself and the people around you. Anybody else want to say something?
My name is Dave. I'm in Boston. One of the things I've learned is that my presence, any person's presence, can be powerful to another person. Physical presence. And in that physical presence, there's already communication. I mean, we call it body language. Yeah. So how I am paying attention to another person with my eyes, is communicating to the other person whether I'm actually listening to them. And if I'm listening and the other person perceives that is a powerful activity, and oftentimes far more powerful than anything I can say.
Okay.
Even to the point that simply being present, that the less said, the more communicated, I guess. It sounds like cliche, but I believe that that's true. I believe that's real.
I had an experience with my guru where I had just gotten there and I had just gotten my PhD from Stanford. I thought I was a pretty smart guy. And Ram Dass said, this is this great teacher. And I was there. And he started talking at length about the price of milk in America. And he was very fixated on talking to these other people there. Can you imagine how much they spend on milk in America? And I'm thinking, maybe this isn't the guy that Ram Dass thinks he is. I don't know. I mean, why did I come all the way over to India to talk about the price of milk? You know, maybe this guy's a little bit senile or something. I don't know about this. And he just kept going on and on about the price of milk. And all of a sudden, there was this explosion in my mind that I knew came from him. It's hard to tell you how I knew that. But what the message was, that we can talk about important things. We can talk about God. We can talk about the Dharma. But that just makes the mind all busy. Let's just talk about bullshit. And it allows us to rest in this ocean of bliss that's always here. And I went into this bliss state that I was almost speechless for the rest of the day. Right? So I hear what Dave is saying, that often silence is golden. And certainly there's the Buddha's flower sermon where he held up a flower. He didn't say anything. He just held up a flower. And one of his main disciple, Mahakaspia, or whatever his name was, became enlightened by just seeing Buddha hold the flower. Sometimes the right word can crack open the mind, certainly. But no matter what's being said, it isn't whether there's sound coming in your ears or not. It's, can you be resting in this ocean of oneness? And that's kind of what Tantra is about, right? I mean, Maharaji was a Tantric teacher, so that even right now I'm jabbering on about 3 levels of surrender and 3 levels of vowing, and here we are talking about this and that. And is that distracting us from this incredibly juicy and wonderful oneness that we can surrender into at any moment? There's this great quote from Walt Whitman where he says, sometimes touching another human being is almost more than I can bear. You felt that, I felt that, but how seldom do we feel that? And I'll bet that you've looked at another person with such love that tears came to your eyes. How often have you looked in the mirror and felt such love that tears came to your eyes? Probably not too often, probably never for most people, right? So that we can begin to take what Dave says and kind of expand that into, even when words are there, even when chaos is happening all around us. We live in a very chaotic time in history right now. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details, but I think it's pretty clear. So that can we have a strong enough practice that we're not getting caught in the words, the actions, the politics, the weather, the traffic, and be a force for healing for those around us. Okay, we have another 3 minutes here, maybe.
Yeah, so we might have time for one more quick question.
Actually, I'm supposed to stop at 11:55, which it is, I think, right? That's
we usually leave some time for announcements, but I believe there was like a hand raised at Zoom. So
one more.
Just give space for that. But maybe it was that you, Jeff?
It was Bob Lair.
Oh.
Yeah, Bob.
Well, thank you. All I was going to say was, one, I want to thank you for the talk. It touched me at many levels. And if I may refer to a bit of what you said earlier, I'm wondering if getting on the road to healing can begin with recognizing that you're the crazy person sitting next to you.
Yes. So in Tibetan Buddhism, there are these teachings called the Lojong teachings. 51 or 59 points of mind training. And one of the slogans is drive all blames into oneself, which is a kind of a weird thing. It sounds like you're blaming yourself. But what's really being said here is that, yes, you are the crazy person. It's not the world out there that's causing you to suffer. That as long as we're blaming the environment, the weather, the traffic, the neighbor, for how we're feeling, healing isn't going to happen. That it's only when we reclaim the blame, not blaming ourselves, but not blaming others, and saying, I'm responsible for how I'm feeling now. Cancer does not cause suffering. Divorce does not cause suffering. Resistance to cancer, resistance to divorce causes suffering, and only by seeing where the suffering is coming from in this more clear way will we be able to skillfully work with it. As long as we think I'm suffering because of cancer rather than I'm the crazy person who's getting all reactive here, then healing isn't going to happen. So yes, you are completely right, Bob.
All right.
Although maybe calling yourself crazy is one step, unnecessary step too far.
All right. Thank you very much, Dale. I wanted to ask, are there any announcements today? Is there a host today, or?
There is a host. There's some snacks out back to enjoy, and hot water or tea. When you're done with your cup, just put it in the sink, and I'll deal with that. I'll be coming around with the Dawn Bowl. Just a donation is $10 to $20. We'll take anything we can get out of you.
Great.
I have an announcement.
Yeah, please, Tom.
This is Tom Bruin. So GBF is embarking on a bold and exciting project to turn our archive of 750 plus talks into a podcast available on 20 different platforms online. So you can listen in your pocket, on your phone, on demand. And so, but one of the things we could really use help with is not just having a title for the talk, but a paragraph or two describing the talk so that would-be listeners online can get a sense of what they're about to get into and maybe browse through so they can find the best medicine for what they need in the moment. And so if you're interested in helping with that, it takes about 15 minutes per talk to craft something. I'm going to put a link in the chat, the guidelines, and you can let me know if you want to help with this effort. I also posted that on our Google group, so you can look for the message there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom.
I have an announcement.
Yes, please, guys.
Or a request. We could use some volunteers to help with setup of Zoom and operating the online version of our weekly sittings. We're going to be short-handed in earlier in the new year, and so it would be great if we could have a couple of people who would help with just setting up the Zoom broadcast in the morning on Sundays.
Thank you, Cass. Great. So we can dedicate the merit of the practice, or we can do your version if you prefer that. You let us know. What will be your preference?
I'm sorry, are you asking me?
Yes. Whether you would like to dedicate the merit of the practice or whether we should do it.
Why don't you do it the way you do it? I'm a very informal guy. I would just say, let's dedicate the merit like it would be 8 seconds long.
That's good. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the quality of all that lives. Have a good Sunday.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you so much, everybody. So good to be with you guys.
Everyone. Yeah.
Thanks, Dale. Great seeing you again, as always.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.